something that I do get asked very commonly is, how did you actually go from becoming an engineer to an investment banker to a sports presenter? And initially, whenever I was asked this question, I used to give this very long, elaborate, extensive answer that made it seem as if this trajectory of mine was the result of very well thought out, logical, deliberate decisions that I made and steps that I undertook, as a result of which I embarked upon this journey. But then through my story, I was connecting the dots, but connecting the dots looking backwards with the aid of hindsight. Put differently, if someone would have told me when I was studying engineering that you'll go on to work at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker, I probably would have asked that person, what have you been smoking, mate? Could I have some of what you're smoking? Then when I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, I had absolutely no idea that I'd go on to become a sports presenter, sharing the stage with the creme de la creme from the sports media industry, with experts such as Virender Sehwag, Ashish Nehra, so on and so forth. While I was doing sports presenting, if someone would have told me that, one day I'm going to be standing before you guys, sharing the stage and talking to you attentive and diligent students, delivering a TEDx speech, again, I probably would have found that very implausible. But here I am, doing exactly that. So what I'm trying to say is that this roller coaster of a journey that I've embarked upon over the last 10 years or so, and that makes me sound very, very old, and I think I am because I'm 30 right now. Gone are the days when school students used to call me bhaiya, like I'm referred to as uncle and sir these days. But you can't deny the aging process. That's one of the constants in life, or one of the few constants that you have in life. But I digress. So going back to what I was talking about, this journey of mine wasn't really the result of some well thought out 10-year plan that I concocted. Like a big role, and probably as big a role, if not a bigger role, was played by randomness, by chance, by luck, by serendipity. And so something that I think we ought to contend with in life is uncertainty, and embracing the fact that there will be a lot of randomness in life. But what are ways in which you can actually inoculate yourself against uncertainty? I think firstly, accept the fact that uncertainty is a constant. I think it was John F. Kennedy who mentioned that one of the few constants that you have in life, or one of the certainties about life, is the fact that there is uncertainty. So one way in which I have successfully been able to control uncertainty in my life is by focusing on controlling the controllables. This is a phrase that I learned from Virat Kohli, my favorite athlete by a country mile: control the controllables. So what you can control is the effort or the input. The result is something that's not always within your control, which I think is a beautiful segue to my second point, which is that if you are completely committed to the process or to the input or to the effort that you're putting in, I think you can completely detach yourself from the result. Because while the effort that you're putting in definitely has a bearing on what the result is like, I think the result could also stem from other factors that are beyond your control. And I can give a couple of examples to drive home this point of mine. When I was in school, I was applying to Goldman Sachs for a very specific division, and I didn't end up getting the job, and I was gutted. I was gutted because I felt that I lacked the merit. I lacked what it took to be a part of Goldman Sachs. But then later, like after the decision was made, I had a phone call with the recruiter, and the recruiter told me that that particular desk that I was gunning for had a hiring freeze that was going on, as a result of which they weren't able to hire me then. And 6 months later, when the hiring freeze was lifted, that's when they hired me. So sometimes you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and you end up making assumptions thinking that, oh, I wasn't good enough or I lacked the merit, but the case might be very, very different. And so detach yourself from the result. Even in my current profession as a sports presenter, recently I was applying to a media house for a project, didn't end up getting it. And I was told later that it wasn't because I lacked the knowledge or lacked the merit, but they were looking for a female anchor for that role and not a male anchor. So you've got to accept that, you've got to move on. I talked about the fact that there's randomness in life. And what happened with me was that I was 2 years into my job at Goldman Sachs, and I was feeling like a Goldmanite. I was wearing the damn jersey of the company every single day, feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of possessiveness to the company with each passing day. And then, as luck may have it, I didn't end up getting my H-1B visa, or the work permit that you need to work in the United States. And my third attempt, which is the final attempt, you get 3 attempts in total, was unsuccessful as well, as a result of which I had to pack my bags, leave America, but not before, of course, throwing a massive farewell bash for myself. And so I took the flight back to India, extremely hungover, but that's irrelevant, and came back not sure as to what I want to do next. So I spent some time on the sidelines, thinking, planning what my next step should be, doing a lot of soul searching. And a part of me was like, maybe I could go back to investment banking, but do so in India, or I could pivot to something else. So that's the quandary, or that's the dilemma that I was facing at that point in time. And so I just felt that while investment banking could be a job or a career or a profession, it wasn't really my calling. And so I thought about, okay, what is it that actually aligns beautifully with my interests and my skills, or my unique skill set? And I just felt that something like sports presenting would be a beautiful marriage between my number one interest, which is sports, which is something I've been following since I was in my diapers pretty much, and my number one skill set, which I'd like to think are my communication skills. And so I took that leap of faith and decided to gravitate towards sports presenting as opposed to continue a career within investment banking, albeit in a different location. Which I think is a beautiful lesson that we can actually extract from this. And it's a line that I always remind myself of, and I think you guys should probably have this tattooed somewhere, written somewhere, where you guys can see this line on a regular basis, which is that उड़ान भरने के लिए छलांग लगाना जरूरी है. In other words, in order for you to actually fly, you have to jump, or you have to take that leap of faith. And sometimes it's scary when you're taking that leap of faith because you might not really have a safety net. But then, as they say, no risk, no reward. Another way to look at that is risk averse is reward averse. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should take an uncalculated risk. You should definitely take a calculated one. Don't jump naked. Have a plan B in mind. Have a plan C in mind. But then, if you feel that the risk that's associated with a particular move of yours is a good price to pay for the reward that you actually stand to gain by virtue of you taking that leap of faith, then do it. But if you think the risk to reward profile is not so favorable, then don't end up taking that risk. Now you might ask, why is it that I didn't take this chalang or this leap of faith much earlier? And I'd say that's because I wasn't self-aware. Like, I didn't know what is it that I was uniquely qualified to do. What is it that made me feel alive? I wasn't aware. And so had I actually continued within banking and had that H1B debacle not quite happened, I probably wouldn't have stopped to think about what is it that I truly want to be doing. And so that's something that I would tell you guys, that sometimes if you aren't sure about what you want to be doing, instead of actually running in one direction like a horse with blinkers, just stop, pause for a second. I think it's okay for you to run with blinkers on if you know that the direction that you're headed in is the direction that you want to go in. For someone like a Virat Kohli, he knows cricket is a singular focus. And so he can run like a horse with blinkers, singularly focusing on cricket with tunnel vision. But if you're someone who isn't quite sure about what direction he or she wants to head in, I think it's a fool's game for you to be running with blinkers on, because you might miss what's in the periphery. You are only seeing what's in front of you. Who knows, maybe something on the periphery might be an easier path for you to get to the mountain. And you end up missing that only because you're running with blinkers on. And so look around. Spend some time thinking as opposed to only doing. Spend some time in solitude. Keep your phones away. Keep your iPads away. Keep all your sources of cheap dopamine away, such that you can actually stop and think about what is it that feels authentic to you. What feels like play to you that might feel like work to others. What are you uniquely qualified to do? What is it that makes you feel alive? And I think these are questions you should be asking. Having said that, I think there's a limit to thinking and planning and soul searching. In other words, you should be biased towards action as well. I think thinking and planning, soul searching, sometimes even things like reading and learning can be a very noble and seductive form of procrastination, stopping you from taking action. You think, I'm doing something productive, I'm doing something cool, but you aren't taking action. So be biased towards action. Be action-oriented. And then you'll find results. Like a beautiful quote comes to my mind from Naval Ravikant, and you guys should definitely follow him on Twitter. Read a book on him as well. It's called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It's going to be a game-changing, a life-changing book. So definitely make a note of that. Naval Ravikant once said, and this is him talking about fine-tuning, recalibrating, reiterating. He said, become the best in the world at what you do. Keep redefining what you do. until that becomes true. So he's basically talking about how you should iterate along the way. So take action, sprint in one direction, rest, reassess, think about whether the direction that you're headed in is the right direction. If it is, continue along that path. If it's not, maybe change your direction to some extent. And you can do this right now in your late teens, in your early 20s, perhaps even in your mid 20s, before it becomes too late, because you have the license to experiment. In fact, when I made that pivot from investment banking to sports presenting, I was 26 when I made that pivot. But it was far from easy. Like, it might look cool on paper, but it was far from easy, only because I had to tame my ego, disembark the mountain that I had already started climbing, and then embark upon a new mountain after that. So it wasn't easy, but you'd rather do this sooner rather than later. So be nimble, be flexible, not least because the world that you're living in is very dynamic. It evolves. Not to mention the fact that you evolve, you change, your taste and preference patterns change. You might be very fascinated by one thing right now, but maybe a year, a couple of years down the line, your fascination might change completely. And so be as fluid and formless as water is, which ends up taking the shape of the container in which it's placed. This is something I learned from Robert Greene, one of my favorite authors, and you should definitely read his books as well. The Laws of Human Nature, Mastery, another good book that talks about how you can actually achieve mastery in a particular field, and how you understand what your life's calling is. What is it that God sent you to this earth to do? So I talked about uncertainty and how the only certainty in life is the fact that you have to contend with uncertainty, and it's a very underrated skill. It's a useful skill, like dealing with uncertainty in life. Because if you aren't dealing with uncertainty in life, you're completely hedging yourself. If you're completely hedging yourself, then there are no returns that you're going to be making. Risk averse is reward averse. Another way in which you can actually deal with uncertainty, I talked about the fact that you control the controllables, you detach yourself from the result when you know that the process is being carried out with complete and utter sincerity. Another way in which you can actually inoculate yourself against uncertainty is by not planning too far ahead. Look, you can make all the 5-year and 10-year plans in the world, and I'm not dissuading you from doing so, definitely do so, but those plans oftentimes go out the window because of the dynamic and constantly evolving nature of life. And so sometimes if you're confused about what to do or what my long-term plan is, just focus on taking the next right step. That's it, the next right step. It's like a maths or a physics problem. You know, sometimes in a question paper you might read, prove that this is equal to this, and you don't even know where to start from. But just taking the next right step, writing the assumptions, let X be this, let Y be this, helps you gain some insight, and all of a sudden, you're on a roll. You understand the next step, and the next one, and the next one, and before you know it, you've proved what you were asked to prove. And then you very proudly write, hence proved. It's a very good feeling. Releases dopamine as well. Having said all of this, you know, despite all of these best practices or hacks, as you cool kids call it these days, there will be a lot of suffering in life. But one of the ways in which you can actually reduce suffering is by reducing the number of desires that you have. You know, in Buddhist philosophy, desire equals suffering. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have any desires whatsoever, but be very picky and choosy about your desires. Have one or two overwhelming desires and then let go of the rest. Accept the fact that the one or two overwhelming desires that you have will be the axis of your suffering, but then let go of the rest. And the reason desire is suffering is because whenever you desire something too strongly, you become too attached to it. As soon as you're too attached to something, that thing can dictate your happiness/sadness. If that thing delivers, you're ecstatic. But if it doesn't deliver, you're absolutely miserable. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you right now who are sitting here are very attached to the idea of an Ivy League college or your dream college, whatever that might be. And rightly so. I was exactly in your shoes when I was going through the application process when I was in class 11 and class 12. But now, as someone who's doing something completely different compared to what he studied in college, I look back at myself, at my former self, thinking about why was I taking it so seriously. So there might be certain problems that look very grave in the short term, but in the grand scheme of things, aren't really as grave as you might think they are at the moment. Another way of saying don't have too many desires is don't expect every single thing to be perfect. Don't strive for perfection. It's a utopian concept. Like tell me one person who isn't stressed about something or the other in life. You know, one part of your life might be absolutely soaring, but then inevitably there's some issue. It could be a financial one, could be a health one, could be a family member. So it's okay for you to actually put a few things on the back burner depending upon what the current need of the hour is. Maybe you're working on a startup or you're working on something big. Your fitness might take a hit, except that it might take a hit in the short term. Maybe you aren't able to socialize all that much. So you can't have it always. So I spoke about desire, I spoke about attachment, and something very important that I think is a good segue to the conclusion is that oftentimes whenever we're disillusioned with life, we think about making wholesale changes to our life when the answer actually lies in simply changing our attitude towards life. Like, it's been a hectic last few days for me. So I had a shoot yesterday because India's playing Australia. So I had a shoot related to the first ODI. Got done around midnight, went back home, packed my bags, took a flight at 4:30 in the morning, came here at 6, got 3.5 hours of sleep in the hotel, and then got here to the venue. I have this today. I'm flying back tonight. I've got a shoot tomorrow that I have to start preparing for at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's a busy few days for me. But then I think instead of actually griping about this, consider pressure to be a privilege. Pressure is a privilege. There are many people who would die to be in my shoes at the moment. Like when I was working those 80 or 100-hour weeks at Goldman Sachs in New York, there were times when I used to gripe about the fact that why is it that I have to go through so much turmoil at the moment. But then there were so many outside the door who'd love to be in the shoes that I was in. And I think thinking about that would make me grateful for being in that position as opposed to griping about the fact that, I was going through 80 or 100-hour weeks. So pressure is a privilege. Pressure also builds diamonds. It's through pressure that you build diamonds. There's a lot of energy that you can actually derive through stress and pressure and channelize that energy in a constructive manner. And hardship, adversity, like all of these things, yeah, they definitely make you mentally tougher. But I think sometimes they also reveal to you the mental toughness that you possessed but weren't quite aware of. When you actually pull something off and you pleasantly surprise yourself thinking, I didn't quite know I had this tenacity or this mental resolution. So changing your mindset towards stress can galvanize you as opposed to letting stress cripple you. And speaking of stress, a beautiful, beautiful line that I came across somewhere is stressful situations are mandatory, but you taking stress is optional. So you don't necessarily have to allow every stressful situation that you're facing to actually induce stress in you. Stressful situations are mandatory, but you taking stress is optional. And sometimes stress will get the better of you. It absolutely will. It will crack you. But embrace that as a part of life. I mean, that's what makes a roller coaster fun, right? It's the ups and the downs that make a roller coaster fun. Imagine if you were constantly up there or constantly down here. Would a roller coaster be fun? It wouldn't. So it's the exhilarating turns, the dynamic twists and turns that you're taking on a roller coaster that make it such a thrilling experience for you. And when you are reaping the rewards that life has to offer, reaping the rewards of your efforts, don't get too carried away. And this is something I remind myself of all the time. Don't get too carried away. Because life is a lot like test cricket. Day one could be bright and sunny, perfect batting conditions. You're having an absolute feast out there in the middle. But day two, especially in a place like England, where the weather is really volatile, day two could be overcast with the ball nipping everywhere. And the late, great Shane Warne used to say that all it takes is two quick wickets, and the game is turned on its head. And so always maintain an even emotional keel. Neither too high when things are going well, nor too low when things are not going so well. Not least because things are never as good or as bad as you may think that they are. Thank you so much.